Another shellac burn video. Sorry, I hope you guys aren't getting sick of these yet. But I did this one because I was curious. Every time I do a shellac burn, I do kind of freehand just over the surface. And I was curious if I would be able to use tape as a boundary for the shellac to kind of keep the burns to a specific shape. So I'm experimenting with some, like a checkerboard shape and different size squares in the later layers. And I decided that red and black would be a good color combination for this. So I'm mixing some dry pigments in with the shellac. This is a 3-pound cut too, so it's got a good amount of shellac. So I try not to put too much pigment in it because that can dilute the shellac too much. But with a 3-pound cut, I don't worry about that quite as much. I still add as little as I can. But I'm not really sure how this is going to work, so I'm just kind of slapping the shellac on. It takes 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, depending on how thick the shellac is, for it to dry so it's not tacky anymore. And then I do the burn. And of course, after the burn, I don't peel the tape off right away. I let it cool so that I don't mess with the wax or anything when I pull the tape away. And I realized as I took the tape off that the shellac had leaked under the tape, which wasn't a huge surprise. But it was still a little tacky under the tape, so I waited for that to dry a little bit too before I started scraping. So the surface is nice and cool when I'm doing this. It's always a lot harder to scrape when it's warm because you end up scraping like a ton of wax away. But when it's cool, the wax doesn't give as much, and you can be a little bit more precise with it. So beyond the shellac leaking under the tape and having to scrape it away, it worked pretty much perfectly. I was a little worried that I was going to set the tape on fire, but with it flat against the wax, that didn't happen, which was nice. And it kept the shape too. You can see where I burned the shellac and it constricts. There are a couple places where it constricted, kind of away from the edges, but for the most part, it kept the shape of the square. I usually do 2 layers or 1 layer between shellac burns, just to make sure that the wax is not super thick and you can still see through it. But for this, since I realized I was going to be scraping, I decided to do a couple layers of wax so that I would have a little more leeway when I went to take the shellac off from under the tape. Once I fuse, I let the surface cool before I put the tape on because I don't want the tape to put any indents in the wax or create any crevices or stick to it too hard. So I just play it safe and wait till it's cool before I stick it on there so it'll peel away pretty nicely. This time when I put the shellac on, I'm trying not to get as much under the tape. So I'm trying to stay away from the edges while still filling the whole area. I think it worked a little bit better. There's not as much that leaked under the tape, but I also have less tape and fewer squares. So I'm fusing it again just to get rid of the scrape marks and the tape marks and things that are left in the wax. Try to get the surface as smooth as I can. When you're fusing over shellac burns, you need to be careful because if you fuse too long in one area, the shellac will start moving around, even if it's underneath layers of wax. So try to move your heat gun around while you're doing it, and if you can go back to the same spot multiple times if you need to, but don't leave it on there for more than a couple of seconds. Now this shellac square was a little bit different. It was getting late and I decided to let the shellac, let it just dry overnight so that I could finish working and go to sleep. And when I came back, I actually, the video that shows me taking the tape off was corrupted. So sorry about that. I wish I could have been able to put it on the video. But when I took the tape off, since it had stayed overnight, the shellac underneath the tape had dried and it dried to the tape. So when I lifted the tape off, there wasn't any shellac left behind. It did, however, in a couple of spots take away a tiny bit of wax. You can see up at the top that kind of black shining through from that second layer of shellac burn, that black square. So I just went back and covered it with a little bit of wax and fused it again, and it took care of that nicely. And I think that was a little bit easier than having to scrape the shellac away and deal with that. So it was interesting the difference between waiting for the shellac to dry just 20-30 minutes and then waiting overnight. It made a big difference. So let me know if you guys try this technique. I'd love to see your results. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.